Okay, now let's go another example. Now let's think about like this. Now sometimes we need to diagnose some errors in our SQL queries, right, in our PHP files. So how can I do these diagnostic tests? For example, I'm using here an update query. I imagine I have an update query in my PHP file, something like this. Update the tutor, set the username David, password test where the tutor ID is equal to 2. Now imagine my tutor file in a tutor SQL file or table. Say I have only 3 or 4 tutors, right? Now if I want to find out any errors in this query, now for example, now in this query I don't have any variables. I can simply, if I don't have any variables, I can simply one method of doing that is I can simply copy and paste this query into PHP MyAdmin and run that query and see whether the query is correct, right? That's what we have done in week 11 or last week lecture session. The now other option is, say, imagine that if we have a variable in my query. Now let's say let's make a variable here. So rather than I'm using the user name directly, I'm using a variable name. So I assign the username here to this particular user variable, and I use that variable. In this case I can't use the PHP MyAdmin, right? So there are a couple of methods. The one method I can use in this case is I can simply echo the query back to the screen and see how where is the problem in that query, right? So what I can do here is I can simply write an echo statement um, and simply echo this particular query variable back to the screen, right? So if I do that, now this with respect to this query, it should be successful because there is no problem. So I'll get this query back, update tutor, set tutor name David, password test where tutor ID is equal to 2. So you can see that there is no problem in this particular query, right? Now imagine that I have now I can use the same so what I can do now is if I wanted to test whether the query is correct, so in this case I can copy and paste this particular query, the result query here, to PHP MyAdmin. So I go to the tutors table and running a SQL query like this. I copy and paste it and it automatically um, include these tutors because I am running the tutors file, right? And if I press the go button, it will execute without having any problem. Now imagine if I do some kind of adjustment, right? For example, I just change the query here. I use the different um, name here. I just type something here. Now you can see here the column name is completely different and it's not true. So in this case, when I run this PHP file, I'll get this unsuccessful statement because I know that, but the query will, so I just echoing the query. You can see the query, but there is unsuccessful message getting in because it's not correct, right? um, so what I can do is now how can I find whether this is correct or not, what I can do is I can copy and paste this into PHP MyAdmin and press the go button. Then I will get the error message here, or what the error in that particular SQL query. So unknown column this, right? So that's the problem. So in that way I can go back to my original script and do the necessary changes, because I know this particular query is incorrect. So these are the ways that I can do diagnostic test, right? I can actually echo it to the screen, and then I can copy and paste the query back to the PHP MyAdmin and run and see the more and more errors. So simply if you echoing it back to the screen, of course then you can understand the queries, whether query is wrong or not. But sometimes if you want to find out more details, you can copy and paste the query to PHP MyAdmin, and you can get some more details about your error message or errors in your script. In certain circumstances I can use PHP MySQL affected rows function to find out how many rows are affected when I running a query related to the select statement, or inserting or updating or replace or delete kind of statements. For example, imagine if I have a query like this. Now in my tutors table, I don't have much tutors, right? I have only 3 or 4 tutors in that table, but for some reason I made a mistake saying, okay, I'm running this update statement where the tutor ID is equal to 102, right? Now in this particular update statement, actually it will execute successfully because there is no syntax errors, and even though there is no tutor ID equal 108, it will display the successful execution, because even though it is not found, because that's how the SQL works in this kind of situation. But there is no tutor ID equal 102 in our table, in our database, right? So how do we know whether it has updated any tutors or not? So in that case we can use this particular function to find out how many rows have been affected by executing this update or delete or whatever the SQL function. So if there is no rows affected, if this function returns 0, then we know that definitely our update statement didn't work very well. So what we can do in this case, I can use MySQL affected rows function somewhere in our query statement or in our script. So for example, in this case it will successfully execute, as I mentioned before, if I run this, even though I don't have any tutor ID equal 102. So what I can do is I can insert that MySQL affected rows function in my in here. In this case, once the update operation is successful, so I think I have went through this in last week 11, so please watch the video. Here is the place I can actually insert MySQL affected rows. If the operation is successful, I want to find out how many rows has been affected, right? So here I am passing the parameter, the connection here. So I am echoing that particular. So in this case, I can see now if I execute, definitely there is no record has been updated. So I know that this query has a problem. So I can go and see the query and see, there is a problem with the tutor ID 102. It may be tutor ID 2, right? So likewise I can do that. these kind of error checkings, or SQL error checking, operational side of error checking, using using affected rows function. So that's another handy function that we can use. Or sometimes we can use this mysql affected rows function back to the user, saying okay, when you execute this particular function or particular query, if you updating something, these are the rows, these are the rows it has been impacted. So that is a handy function that we can actually use in detecting and managing errors as well.